Now, in the previous episode, we found out that King Wu and his allies rallied about 100,000 fighting men and, rallied at this place called Mengjing. They basically had a ceremony and then they just all went back home. So, what happened after that? We'll find out in this episode. Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Apingo. I'm that Chinese history guy. Here we share the myths, legends, and histories of the Chinese people from the first creator to the last imperial dynasty. More than 6,000 years of stories, one video at a time. And if you like content like this and stories like this, don't forget to like, sub, comment, and share this video and this channel with everyone you know. Now, as we mentioned in the previous episode, after the military rally at Mengjin, King Wu of the Zhou people returned with his forces to the Zhou capital, and he stepped up the preparations for the impending showdown that he knew would come. And in order to do that, of course, military preparation was one thing. He also sent out spies and scouts, into the Shang capital at Zhaoge to ensure that he was always updated on the latest developments within the Shang court. Now, over the next 1 to 2 years, the spies, continue bringing back this information and intel on what the Shang has been up to, and this information, this intel was getting increasingly encouraging for the Zhou people, because the Shang court was fully, by this time, overtaken by the cronies and the corrupt officials, and the Tyrant Zhou, Zhou Wang, had completely, discarded all capable ministers and people who would basically give him good advice and constructive criticism. All of them were gone, and what he's left with was, the corrupt officials, the hangers-on, and the cronies. Now, Lord Bigan, as we spoke about in the previous series, had his heart literally plucked out of his body, for simply trying to appeal to the tyrant's sense of conscience, to his conscience, which, let's face it, we all know by this time is practically non-existent. So and one of King Zhou's brother, Jizi or Gija, had to feign madness, in a desperate attempt to preserve his own life, although he was thrown into a dungeon, but his supposed madness kind of kept him alive for the next couple of years. And the tyrant's other brother, Wei Ziqi, was so disappointed with the rule, with Shang rule, by this time, that he decided to leave the capital. A more correct term would be escape the capital with all the royal household's worship implements, the implements used in ancestral worship of the Shang royal house. He took all of it with him and went into hiding. Now, at the same time, the eastern lands of the Shang kingdom were wrecked with ever more numerous and ever more intensive rebellions and incursions by the Dongyi tribes, the Dongyi people, while the Shang populace, long oppressed and exploited by heavy taxes and conscription, and literally squeezed dry by the ruling class and the aristocrats, all this unhappiness, all this anger, all this rage, they were just boiling and seething under the surface, and it was basically just threatening to finally explode into open rebellion and uprising in the heartlands as well. Now, with all these external threats and all these internal problems, bubbling up everywhere, the Shang kingdom by this time, it could be said to be well and truly on its last legs, and all it needed was just a spark. Maybe a person to lead the final charge, to finally tip this whole situation over and consign the Shang Dynasty into becoming another page in history. Now, with the main bulk of the Shang military, their regular forces, trained soldiers, as opposed to militia and just haphazardly raised fighting people. Yeah, with the main bulk of those trained soldiers more or less permanently engaged on the eastern front with the Tongyi people, thereby leaving a huge void, on the western front, practically within the Shang Kingdom's own backyard. King Wu's father, King Wen's last words, his final words, rang loudly in our new king's mind. "Oh, do not hesitate when the time arrives." Now, with those words ringing in King Wu's mind, he immediately sent out the messengers to call up the vassal lords and raised the entire force of the Zhou kingdom. The time has indeed arrived to finally overthrow the corrupt rule of this tyrant. Now, all that is left for everyone involved was to just march on to the Shang capital and overthrow this tyrant and, maybe burn down the city along the way. Who knows? But there was just this little incident that happened. Before the armies marched off, the Zhou court's royal historian conducted a ceremonial divination. Royal historians of that time were basically, also the shamans of the court, the royal shaman as well, if you could call them that. Royal astrologer, royal historian, royal shaman, basically is a 3-in-1 position. So this royal historian of the Zhou court conducted, of course, a ceremonial divination for the outcome of this battle. But things did not really go as planned because the omens that he saw in this divination were extremely bad. Like, really bad. If you march off, you're bound to fail and everyone's gonna die kind of bad. So, he did what any responsible royal historian would do. He tried to stop King Wu from going on the campaign, of course telling him, "My lord, this would surely fail and everyone would die." However, King Wu at this time, hell-bent on seeking revenge for his family and for his father, angrily chastised the royal historian. "I have accepted this sacred mission laid upon me by the heavens to deliver the people from their suffering. No man, nor spirits, nor omens can stop me from carrying out the will of heaven." And so, with those words, on the 26th day in the first month of the year 1046 BCE, with Jiang Shang or Jiang Ziya as chief strategist and grand marshal of the army, King Wu of Zhou led a force of 300 chariots, 3,000 elite fighting men, and about 45,000 armored infantrymen on the campaign that will end the Shang Dynasty once and for all. Now, after almost a month on the road, on the 21st day of the second month of the year 1046 BCE, the forces of Zhou arrived once again at Mengjing Ferry and met up with their allies and vassal lords. Now, Jiang Shang ordered the destruction of all the boats and ferries that brought them across the Yellow River, thereby cutting off their own retreat. And it was a show of determination that they would destroy the evil regime of the Shang, or they will all perish trying. Now, after that was done, the allied forces then marched northward to this place called Banquan, which is somewhere northwest of today's Huixian County in Henan. And from there, they turned eastwards, making a straight line for the Shang capital at Zhaoge. Now, having met no resistance of any kind along the way, I mean, kind of hard to believe you are in the heartlands of the Shang Kingdom and you are just marching like tens of thousands of people with no resistance. Yeah, anyways, this is the story, and the grand historian is sticking to it. So, without meeting any resistance, the allied forces made their way through the heartlands of the Shang kingdom to arrive at this place called Muye, about 35 kilometers outside the capital. And they made this entire journey within a mere 6 days. And they arrived in the night of the 26th of the second month of 1046 BCE. Now, after a night of rest and preparations, King Wu of Zhou had the allied forces form up, in the morning. He had them formed up in 3 legions, in 3 separate formations on the battlefield before giving them a speech to, rally morale and justify why they were fighting this war. And this speech will be later known as Moosh, which basically lists down, the tyrant sins and stuff like that. So, according to the story, to the records, King Wu, stepped up to a altar with a golden ceremonial axe in his left hand and a white commanding baton in his right hand. He addressed the assembled fighting men. Hail, brave warriors of the West! Hail, great lords of the West! My friends, lords, commanders, leaders and fighters from the tribes, clans and states of the realm, raise your dagger axes, line up your shields, straighten your spears, and listen to me. The ancient wise man once said that only roosters crow to announce the coming of dawn. And if a hen was to crow at dawn, it bodes ill for the household. However, the Tyrant Zhou only have eyes and ears for that devilish, seductress Tati. He is disregarding the traditions of his people and forsaking the worship of the heavens and his ancestors. The tyrant has forsaken the good advice of his own brothers and relatives in favor of installing criminals and escaped slaves into high positions, making them powerful ministers and elevating them above all other men. Now, we all know that these criminals and corrupt officials are cruel in their treatment of the people, oppressing them and exploiting them mercilessly for their own gains. They turn the sacred royal court into a place of decadence and debauchery. Today, I swear to you, I swear to lead you in carrying out this mission laid upon us by the heavens. We shall mete out the punishments that the heavens have deemed fit for this tyrant and his cronies. Fight hard, my warriors. Make sure to check that your formation is intact and orderly after taking 6 or 7 steps. Fight hard, my warriors. Make sure you're still in line with your brothers after stabbing the enemies 6 or 7 times. Fight hard, my warriors. Let the enemies see you as bears, as tigers, as leopards, and as dragons. But do not kill any who desires to surrender. Let them come to us. Let them help us in accomplishing our mission. Fight hard, my warriors, for if you do not, the one to suffer the consequences is no one but yourselves. Now, with these tens of thousands of people marching on the capital through the kingdom's heartlands, one would expect the Shang court to at least be in a state of panic, or at least, trying their best to do something about the situation. However, that was not really the case. Even after receiving the news that the Zhou army was launching a full-scale offensive against the capital at Zhaoge, King Zhou and the officials of the Shang court basically showed little signs of panic. Yeah. And even with the main bulk of the Shang forces, their main regular army even with the main bulk of them tied down in the east, dealing with the Tongyi incursions and rebellions, the Shang court felt confident that they were still able to raise a sizable number of fighters for the defense of the capital. Now, it was said that the Shang were able to, put together about 530,000 fighting men from amongst, the civilians, the peasants, and some of the, already stationed garrison at the capital. And they further armed 170,000 slaves to be put, in the defense of Zhao. So in total, we are talking about 700,000 men defending this one city. Now, against these tens of thousands that King Wu brought with him. So, feeling secured in his numerical advantage, King Zhou decided that he would personally lead the Shang forces on the battlefield. So he brought them out into Muye and formed up his 700,000 fighting men on the northern side of the battlefield, full of confidence that, he would be able to destroy the allied forces in one single battle. Now, facing an enemy that outnumbered him practically more than 10 to 1, King Wu of Zhou, Zhou Wuwang, showed no signs of fear. He knew that while he was outnumbered, his men were better trained, better prepared, and better equipped. And most important of all, he knew that the Shang forces were extremely low in morale, with many of them being practically forced into fighting for a cause that they did not believe in. Now, having, getting a feel of the enemy, of the lay of the battleground, King Wu then gave the order for Jiang Shang or Jiang Ziya to lead a portion of the elite fighters to charge the main bulk of the enemy. And, these people really charged like tigers, like leopards, fierce and ferocious fighters. Of course, they are the elite among the elite of the allied forces. They charged, straight towards the enemy lines. And, seeing the well-organized offensive, the armed slaves who basically were put on the front line to be cannon fodder, and let's face it, they did not even want to be on the battlefield in the first place. They saw this charge coming at them. I mean, imagine you were there, like, the heck am I doing here, So they were the first to drop their weapons and surrender on the spot. And, some of them just basically defected outright on the battlefield, turned their spears around and started charging their own people. And this carry on, wave after wave of this happened on the battlefield, on the front line. And so with more and more waves of armed slaves and even, the Shang regular soldiers either just surrendering or turning their weapons around on the battlefield, as you can imagine, confusion spread quickly on the front line. Who the hell am I fighting? Are you with me or against me? Are you the enemy or are you... all these things are going on. And this confusion, come on, anyone with any basic knowledge of battles, especially this kind of ancient battles, will know that a strong enemy is one thing to be worried about, but the greatest danger to your own lines is actually this confusion on the front lines. So when this happened, the tide of the battle basically turned before it even started. And King Wu, sensing that the tide of the battle has turned, then led the main force in chariot charges, against enemy lines, personally leading chariot charges into enemy lines. And in one of these chariot charges, King Wu broke through the Shang's defense line and, went straight for King Zhou, the Tyrant. And the Tyrant, seeing that, the day was lost, turned tail and ran back to the capital, ran back to his palace. Now, if having a confused front line was not bad enough, now that the king himself has escaped. It just made it worse. Seeing that their king and commander flee the battlefield, the remaining Shang soldiers, the ones who were still trying to put up a fight to defend their capital, to defend their kingdom, seeing their commander and their king flee the battlefield, that was the last straw. They finally broke, and a rout, ensued. And it would not be an exaggeration to call this Battle of Muye a massacre. If we go according to the grand historian account, or even the book of documents, the accounts in both of them, I think it would be more apt to call it the massacre at Muye, because when the Shang army broke and the killing, the massive killing starts, according to the book of documents in the book of Zhou, chapter Wu Cheng, or Shang Shu, Zhou Shu, Wu Cheng, it was said that the blood shed on that day was enough to float logs on the battlefield. Imagine how much blood that was, it was enough to float logs on the battlefield. Not something small like this, but we're talking about trunks of small trees maybe. Yeah, you get the idea. So yeah, that was how much bloodshed took place on that day. And having fled the battlefield, the tyrant King Zhou managed to make his way back to the palace, and knowing that the end was near, ordered to have most of his treasures, the jewels, the precious stones, gold, silver, what have you, ordered to have most of his treasures gathered up and piled up at this Lu Tai, which was an extravagant pavilion that he built, and spent many decadent days and nights with Daji and his numerous attendants and concubines, mostly in the nude. So yeah, I think I mentioned that in the episode about King Zhou, so you can check that out here. So yeah, he got his treasures piled up at Lu Tai, and there he built a pile, Pyre, a pile, and basically set himself on fire. King Zhou's end, he was not killed by the enemy because he would rather choose to die by his own hands and destroying his own body rather than giving his enemies the satisfaction of killing him and desecrating his corpse. So there, King Zhou built a pile, set it on fire, and burned himself to death, self-immolated. And that was the end of the tyrant. Now, when King Wu finally, made his way into the palace, into this pavilion Lu Tai, and he found King Zhou's burnt remains, he still, took 3 arrows from his quiver and shot 3 arrows into the tyrant's still smoking body, I would presume, and had him beheaded. At least to signify that the slaying of the tyrant was carried out by his, by his hands. And when they found Daji was also found in the palace. She was also executed, beheaded upon captured. Some sources say the order to behead her was given by Jiang Shang. We wouldn't know, but yeah. In either case, Daji was beheaded as well, and both their heads, one still smoking most probably, and one freshly cut off from the body. Both the heads were hung up on 2 long poles, with white flags or white banners, and displayed prominently, outside the main gates of the palace complex. And there they hung, and most probably until they rotted away. So yeah, that was the end of the tyrant and the devilish seductress. And in the following couple of months, 3 to 4 months after the Battle of Muye, Zhou allied forces went on to sweep up the remnants of Shang loyalists spread across the realm, and according to this E09 Shifu chapter, they went on to annihilate 99 city-states and subjugated 652 more minor states and tribes and clans. And in the process, 180,000 enemy combatants were killed, with a further 330,000 taken as prisoners of war. Now, the Battle of Muye was the final battle of the Shang Dynasty and a pivotal event in Chinese history. It basically changed the direction of the development of Chinese culture and civilization. Had we continued with the Shang Dynasty, most probably, a lot of things would have been phased out, like, complicated and expensive and extravagant worship rituals and ceremonies most probably would have been phased out as it had been going on for the last 2 or 3 generations of Shang rulers. Human sacrifices would most probably have been phased out much earlier than it did in our timeline. So yeah, it ended, the roughly 600-year rule of the Shang Dynasty, and it established the Zhou people, the Zhou clan, the Zhou state, as the new rulers of the land, which in turn ushered in the first formal feudal slave-owning society in East Asia. The philosophies, the cultures, and the traditions that emerged from this period, known as the Western Zhou Dynasty, would actually deeply guide the thinking and the development of the Chinese people up to this day. Now, basically, all the isms you hear about in Chinese philosophy, like, Confucianism, Taoism, and all the various schools of thought of philosophy and early proto-sciences, all were discovered, or rather were developed during this period in the Western Zhou Dynasty. Famous characters like Lao Tzu, Confucian, Mencius, Sun Tzu, many of these great thinkers and philosophers were a product of the Western Zhou Dynasty. So yeah, it is quite a big deal that the Battle of Muye happened and the Zhou people came to power. Now, that's it for today, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't remember to give us a like, a sub, comment on what you think, and share the video with everybody you know. And of course, if you've been following this series, you would know that in the previous episode I raised some questions about this whole series of events, that led up to the fall of the Shang Dynasty. And yeah, if you want to know what I think, keep your eyes peeled for the next episode. The next episode is going to be a bit different. I would be talking, it will be more of like a conjecture on my part on what I feel would actually be a more logical explanation of the entire series of events, between 1049, 1048 BC to 1046 BC, this whole series of events, what would actually make more sense? And not just pure, conjecture on my part, but more or less based on some interpretation of ancient source texts and other new information that was more recently discovered, like new ancient texts that has been unearthed and transcribed by scholars within the last 10 to 20 years. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled for that one. And if you would like to really support this channel and my work, you can do so on Patreon. The links are available in the description box below, or it should be on the screen right now. So yeah, you can be a patron and you will get access to you get early access to the videos. Basically, for the moment, there are other perks that will come further down the road. And that's it for today, and I will see you beautiful people. I will see you in the next episode.